The other day, I was watching a TED Talk on the power of breathing, and the speaker was walking the audience through some breathing exercise, one of which he called water breathing, which is a 4-second inhale followed by a 4-second exhale and repeated for 10 cycles. And as he was going through the TED Talk, he was counting out loud as the members of the audience were practicing the breathing themselves. And I thought that was so nice because I find that if I have to breathe and count in my head at the same time, it's actually quite challenging. So I thought it would be a fun code kata to build a little interface that would actually visually walk me through that breathing concept as well. So you can see here I'm in the ready state, and when I hit start breathing, we breathe in for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds, in for 4 seconds, and out for 4 seconds. And this meter here represents the activity within the lungs, and you can see we also get a representation of the number of breathing cycles we've done and the timer as well. And at any point we could hit stop breathing and it will go to the end state or the done state, and we can go ahead and try it again if we want to. Now if we look at this element, what we'll see is that the bar here is animating using a CSS transition property. We're transitioning the height. For a timing function, I chose ease in out because I feel like that mirrors the way that I breathe. I kind of slow down at the bottom and I slow down at the end, and then I race a little bit in the middle to catch up with where I'm supposed to be in the overall cycle. And then all we're doing is transitioning between 0% height and 1% height. So even though I'm only updating the counter every 1 second, I'm getting a very smooth animation during that whole cycle. So let's take a look at the code to see how this all works. So normally I would probably manage something like this, which is a not super complicated but not trivial UI with something like Angular where each one of these states may be represented by a separate component. And let's just wait here till cycle 10 is done, and then you can see that it actually does transition to the done state on its own. Breathe in for 4 seconds and breathe out for 4 seconds. And there you go, transitions to done. So back to the code. So we have our different states. We have our ready state, our running state, which has the description here, which will hold the counter, and the meter here, which holds the animation. And then we have our done state. Now each one of these states is being managed by a JavaScript class, and I use class in the loosest sense here. It's really just a constructor function. And then all we're doing is transitioning from one state to another by calling this goTo state and passing in the constructor function. So initially I start at the ready state, and then each one of the states knows which other state it has to transition to. So when I call the ready state, or when I call any goTo state, it'll check to see if I have an active state. If so, it calls a teardown function. So each state is both responsible for initializing itself in the constructor and tearing itself down when asked to externally. And then all we do is move on to that new state constructor and keep track of that so that we know how to tear down that state the next time. So let's just take a quick look at these states. The ready state and the done state are quite simple. They really just manage a single button. It's the running state that has some complexity to it. And here you can see I'm using my jQuery selectors just to quickly find elements in the DOM, add some classes, add some click handlers. Here you can see I can use the .off to unbind every single click handler on that node during the teardown phase. So jQuery there's nothing here that I would need jQuery to do necessarily, but it adds a simplicity and an elegance that you still cannot find when using the native DOM methods. The handling the start click, so refresh here. So clicking on this button, all we're going to do is tell it, the state machine, to go to the state running state, which will implicitly explicitly call the teardown from the state management and then instantiate the running state constructor. And this is the one that gets a little complicated. So we have our state itself, we have our description node, that's the counter, and we have our meter node, that's the thing that's animating up and down. So First, we configure the tempo of the breathing. So the target in count, that's the number of seconds to breathe in. The target out count is the number of seconds to breathe out. And the cycle count is the number of in-out breath cycles we want to go through during this particular phase. And then here we're keeping track of where we are within that overall cycle management. Now, it gets a little funny because in order to, this whole thing is based on time, right? These increment every second. The in and out is 4 seconds a piece, and then we have to do the animation and everything. Now, the issue is that time is a funny thing in the browser. The interval here is based on something that the browser is running in the background. The CSS transitions are based on calculations on the GPU or wherever that gets done. So we're sort of making a leap of faith here that all the timing is just gonna line up, which may or may not be true. Especially, who knows what's going to happen if I unfocus the browser? Is the animation actually running in the background? Does the browser pause things? There might be some funny, quirky stuff that happens that we maybe not be able to account for. But so again, I'm just taking a leap of faith that this is actually running in real time, so to speak. And I break out the rendering functions into a couple of different things. So we have the render count, and the render count, if we jump down to that, all that's doing is putting the description into the particular text node. That's a super easy one. Now, the tricky one here is the reset meter. Now, the reset meter I need because we don't actually strip out any of these DOM elements when we change state, right? You can see I have all 3 states here, even though I'm only rendering the last state, which means that the height element, or the meter here, you can see already has a height applied to it in the background, even though it's not active. So if I were to cut out of this and we go to stop breathing, you can see that the meter here in the background is at height 100%, which means that if I were to then render this again and move it back down to 0%, we would still incur the transition cost of that CSS transition property. So in order to not do that, I have to call this reset meter, which turns off the transition duration, moves the height back to 0%, and then asks jQuery to get the height of that element. And that's going to force the browser to do a repaint so they can apply these CSS values in order to calculate the height. So we're going to do a 0-second transition back to a height of 0% at the start of this state, so that we can then proceed with the natural in-out transition. So after we have the reset meter, then we can go ahead and set up the meter for the in phase, which we jump down here. You can see we have set up meter for in, set up meter for out. At this point, we set the natural duration. So the 4-second inhale, the 4-second exhale, sorry. And then here we can use the height transition properly. So you need to know a little bit about the CSS application and the transitions and the browser repaints in order to understand how to get around that little funkiness. And then the tick count, so the marching of time forward, I'm essentially just incrementing my values and then changing directions as necessary. Now, again, I'm sort of relying on the fact that all of the time just lines up between the set interval and the transition timing. If it weren't executing in real time, you'd probably get some visual artifacts there about some weird delays, or it doesn't animate all the way in one direction before it switches direction, etc. Thankfully, because of the CSS transitions sort of naturally work, even if there's problems, then hopefully it shouldn't be too bad. And then the done state, again, is just managing that single button here to restart the running state. And there you go. So again, I just thought it'd be a fun code kata to try and walk myself through these breathing exercises. I especially like that visual representation here because it takes out even now the thinking in terms of parsing text. I can just sort of watch this meter and breathe in and breathe out. Yeah, fun stuff. Love me some JavaScript.